but then you lose a court case because of a wrongful firing. I felt bad because of the boys, and I felt bad for the fans where a character was...
Some old family sitcoms leave behind nothing but a few gentle memories, but Valerie does not. This may be one of the messiest, darkest, and most toxic shows American television ever created, a show that got ripped apart 3 different times in its name alone. And that still is not even the worst part of the story. Because behind the studio lights behind that house that looked so warm and cozy, there was a whole pile of secrets the production side probably wanted buried forever, while the people who got trapped inside it just kept digging them back up. From decisions cruel enough to erase an identity, to cast shakeups that barely had a shred of humanity left in them, this is not just the story of a sitcom anymore. This is a collapse that was forced to keep airing right in front of America. Let's get into the 20 most unbelievable facts about Valerie. Number 20. The sitcom changed its name because it lost its actual star. There may be no fact stranger than its name. A lot of people see this show change names a few times and assume the network was just fumbling around trying to find something that sounded smoother. That is not what happened. With Valerie, every name change was a scar left by a behind-the-scenes war so messy that honestly, if you took this whole thing and turned it into a drama movie, it would probably sell like crazy. At first, the show was simply called Valerie, which makes perfect sense because Valerie Harper was the star. But by the end of season 2, when Harper left the show, the title changed to Valerie's Family, even though she was not there anymore, partly because there was still hope she might come back. Then, from season 4 to season 6, it became the Hogan Family. But that is still not the weirdest part. Brandon Tartikoff said that internally, people secretly called the whole mess Throw Mama from the series, which is funny and a little chilling at the same time. In the writer's version of the story, Valerie Hogan later died in a car accident, and Lorimar still wanted to keep the word Valerie in the title even after firing Valerie Harper. Harper would not accept that, took them to court and shut it down. And trust me, that was only the beginning. Number 19. Valerie got dropped by 2 networks. Some sitcoms get cancelled once and disappear like they never existed. But the Hogan Family was different. It got cancelled 2 times, first by NBC in 1990, then CBS shut it down for good in 1991. That alone is weird enough because family sitcoms usually survive on a feeling of stability. This one felt more like it was standing outside with a suitcase waiting to see which network might still keep it around for one more season. What makes it even more twisted is that this was actually the very first sitcom from Miller Boyett, a name that is almost synonymous with the golden age of American family sitcoms. And out of all the shows they made, this was the only one that did not air on ABC. Just hearing that, you can already tell it was the lost kid of the family. It started on NBC, got let go, got picked up by CBS, then got abandoned all over again. Honestly, if the broadcast life of a sitcom could be told like a love story with too many breakups, this one would be a top contender. What feels strangest to me is that after all those times being cast aside, this show still was not done giving audiences reasons to stare in disbelief. Let's move on to fact number 18, which gets even weirder because it involves condoms. Number 18. This was the first primetime TV show to mention condoms. Some things sound totally normal now, but if you drop them back into 1987, they were enough to send American television into a panic. With Valerie, that moment came from one short word: condom. The episode called Bad Timing is often brought up as the first time that word showed up on American primetime television. You might think that sounds strange, but I do not. Because Valerie was never as well behaved as it looked on the surface. This was a family sitcom with a mother, kids, and those familiar growing up problems. But then, it went right at teenage sex and birth control things, A lot of shows from that same era were still tiptoeing around like a cat circling a hot pan. NBC got so tense about it that they aired a parental warning before the episode. Some affiliate stations even moved it to a different time slot or skipped it altogether. One single episode made a few stations react like they had just smelled smoke, and that tells you everything about the mood back then. The best part is the twist that came later. Eventually, that same episode was released for teachers and health educators to use as material encouraging safe sex. That is exactly the kind of irony Valerie seemed to specialize in. Number 17. This show did not flop, did not explode, then suddenly took off. What makes Valerie feel stranger than a lot of other sitcoms to me is that it did not follow the usual path. With shows like this, there are usually only two possibilities. Either nobody notices at first, maybe people even trash it, and then it slowly rises. Or it comes out swinging and turns into a huge hit right away. Valerie sat somewhere in the middle, and that middle ground is exactly what made it weird. It did not flop. But it also was not the kind of thing the whole country was talking about the next morning. It just sat there, pretty pleasant, pretty solid enough to survive, but still feeling like it was waiting for its moment. Then, that moment came when NBC moved the show to Monday nights at 8:30, right after ALF. From there, the ratings started climbing in a real way, and by May 1987, NBC had already renewed it for Season 3. I like the way this show rose because it did not feel like fireworks. It felt more like a show that quietly slipped into people's TV habits so slowly that a lot of viewers probably did not even realize when it had become familiar to them. Number 16. This show's house somehow lived on in two other sitcoms. Did you ever notice that this is one of those discoveries that makes me love old American sitcoms, because suddenly the whole TV world feels less like a giant empire and more like a little neighborhood? If you have a sharp eye, you may have noticed that some of the interior sets from Valerie's house, especially the living room and kitchen area, seem to show up again in Step by Step and Family Matters. If you ever had that feeling, you probably were not imagining it. It is just a small detail, sure, but to me it fits the fate of the show itself in a strangely perfect way. Valerie was already a series that survived by changing names, shifting its center and stumbling forward. So the idea that its house also found a second life in other sitcoms almost feels too perfect for Hollywood logic. Television back then was very practical. If something still worked, they kept using it. But for viewers, it creates this weirdly fun feeling like these sitcom families were not just living in the same era, but taking turns renting the same address. Pretty great, honestly. Number 15. In the middle of all the drama, Jason Bateman. Still remembered, Valerie in the warmest way. The press remembers the lawsuits, the title changes the cold decisions from the network. But after enough years go by, what sometimes stays in the memory of the people who were there is just one person. With Valerie, that comes through really clearly in Jason Bateman. In 2013, when Valerie Harper announced she had terminal brain cancer, Bateman sent Entertainment Tonight a very heartfelt message. What he basically said was that Valerie was someone he learned a lot from, not just about comedy, but about how to make anybody who came near her or worked with her feel comfortable through laughter and her full of life energy. It does not sound like one of those empty, polite statements people make because they have to. It sounds like a real memory from someone who grew up right inside her orbit, and that is the part that makes this story feel special to me. A show people remember for all kinds of chaos somehow still left Jason Bateman with a very warm picture of her. Hollywood usually remembers the scandal first, but the people who once stood in the same frame sometimes remember each other through kindness. Number 14. The theme song came from exactly the two people you would never expect. There are some opening themes where the second you hear them, You automatically feel like you are about to watch something fancier than it really is. On the surface, Valerie was still a very familiar family sitcom. One mom, three sons, a few household problems, a few little lessons by the end of the episode. But then the theme starts, and suddenly everything sounds a whole lot classier. What makes me laugh is that the song really was not ordinary at all. Together Through the Years was sung by Roberta Flack, and the music was by Charles Fox. Just those two names alone are enough to make you look twice. This was not some throwaway opening theme written just to get the job done. 13 years earlier, Charles Fox had written the music for Killing Me Softly with his song The Massive Hit by Roberta Flack herself that won Grammys and climbed to number 1. Number 13. The woman who came in to replace Valerie was an even more familiar face than you think when a show starts wobbling. What do you do if you are the producer and you want to save it? Simple. You bring in a recognizable face to pull viewers in. So that is exactly what they did with Sandy Duncan. And to America at that time, Sandy Duncan was one of those faces you had definitely seen somewhere before. It was just that different people remembered her for different reasons. Some remembered her from Broadway, where the name Sandy Duncan was practically glued to Peter Pan. Some remembered her from Roots. And a whole lot of people remembered her in a very everyday, very American TV way. Oh right, I have seen that smile on television before, especially from the Wheat Thins commercials. That is the part I really like. Sandy Duncan did not come in just to fill a hole. She came in like a calming dose. Behind the cameras, everything was tangled up like a pile of string. But in front of the cameras, viewers just saw an interesting change and kept going with it. Number 12. Valerie Harper's husband worked on the show too. Here is another strange fact from behind the scenes. Tony Cacciati was not just Valerie Harper's real-life husband. He was also working right there on the show itself. In other words, this was not one of those situations where an actress fights with the studio and her husband stands on the outside defending her. No, her husband was inside the machine too. And once you understand that, you can see why everything got so tense. When Valerie Harper stepped into those negotiations, standing beside her was not just her life partner, but someone who also had a place behind the scenes. So the whole story changed color. It stopped being just about salary. It started feeling more like a tug of war over who really had a voice on this show, who got to decide where it was headed, and who would be forced to step aside once everything started heating up. Number 11. The Hogan House had a real address, but that was not where it was shot. When people hear a family show set in Oak Park, Illinois, most viewers naturally assume that is where they filmed it, or at least where they got the inspiration. But Valerie did not work that way. The Hogan House was placed in Oak Park, an upscale suburb of Chicago that sounds exactly right for an American sitcom family, peaceful, decent, and nice enough to raise 3 boys in a house where something was always going on. The only thing is that address belonged more to the script than to the cameras, and that is what makes it interesting. American television back then was very good at picking exactly the right place name, so viewers would fill in the rest in their own heads. The second you hear Oak Park, you can almost picture the whole neighborhood, the school, the neighbors, and the kind of life this family belongs to. They did not need to actually drag the crew there to create that feeling. There were even exterior shots that made sharp-eyed viewers think of Northwestern in Evanston, which is a completely different place. So, in short, Valerie gave you a very clear address, then used television to make you believe in it, even though the reality was something else. Number 10. 2 neighbors of the Hogan House had both played the same role in Ferris Bueller. Now here is a little game for anybody who loves sitcoms and teen movies from the 80s. While watching the Hogan Family, did you ever notice that 2 faces passing through the Hogan world looked familiar in a totally different way? If you did, You are not imagining it. In the Hogan Family, Judith Kahan and Edie McClurg were both familiar faces around the Hogan house, but the fun part is somewhere else. In the world of Ferris Bueller, they were both tied to the exact same name, Grace. Edie McClurg was Grace the secretary in the 1986 movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, while Judith Kahan was Grace in NBC's 1990 sitcom version of Ferris Bueller. If you caught that right away, congrats, you really do know your TV. And if it was not until you heard the name Grace that the last piece clicked into place, that is okay too, because that is exactly the fun of these old shows. They always hide a few little recognition games for sharp-eyed viewers. Number 9. It took just 1 week for Valerie to get back in motion after losing its main star. Some shows lose their main star and then disappear for a long stretch while everybody scrambles to patch things up, rewrite everything, and pray the audience still has enough patience to wait for them to come back. Valerie did not do that. It was delayed by exactly 1 week. Just 1 week. Then Sandy Duncan walked out in front of the live studio audience like this machine absolutely was not allowed to stay still any longer than that. That is just bizarre and hard to believe. The show had just lost the woman whose name was on it, had just replaced the whole center of the family, and was already trying to make viewers accept a new rhythm inside the same old house. And American television back then still handled it like a problem that had to be solved immediately. Not next month, not next season. 1 week later. Number 8. Reruns. Actually changed the way audiences remembered this show. If you remember this show simply as the Hogan Family, honestly, I cannot blame you at all, because later on the reruns themselves taught audiences to remember it that way. Valerie did not just change names while it was still airing originally. Once it moved into rerun life, almost everything got packaged all over again to make it cleaner, simpler, and easier to sell. A whole lot of episodes that had originally aired under the names Valerie or Valerie's Family were later bundled together under just one label, the Hogan Family. So, the messy history of the show got flattened out right in front of the audience. And that is not even all. Even the opening sequence was often shortened in reruns. So if you grew up with reruns and always assumed this show had been the Hogan Family from the start, that actually makes perfect sense. It is not exactly that you remembered it wrong. Television had already gone in and edited that memory for you. Number 7. When the show changed. Moms, Josh Taylor was the one who finally got room to shine. Josh Taylor had been on this show from the beginning, but it was not until Valerie lost its central mother figure that he really started to matter. That is the strangest part. In the early stretch, Michael Hogan was written as a pilot husband who was away all the time, so even though Josh Taylor was the dad of this family, the character still felt more like someone who came in and out than someone holding the whole house together. Taylor himself was also juggling Days of Our Lives at the time, so everything around Michael Hogan had that exact feeling of, he is here, but he has not really put down roots yet. Then, Valerie Harper left the show, Sandy Duncan came in, and suddenly this dad could not keep being just the guy who dropped by once in a while. Josh Taylor later left Days of Our Lives to expand his role on the sitcom, and Michael Hogan was also written to be home more often so he could help hold the family together after that loss. That was the moment the character finally clicked with the show. It is kind of funny. They replaced the mom, changed the show's name, shifted the whole center of the story, and yet the person who suddenly benefited the most as a role was the dad who had been sitting there from the start. Number 6. Valerie never handed the role to Sandy Duncan. What you might do a double take when you hear me say this. Yep, I am not making it up. There was absolutely no scene where Valerie Harper smiled, shook Sandy Duncan's hand and said something like, "Your turn now." The truth is, Valerie Harper was still angry and still getting ready to head into a legal battle when the show brought Sandy Duncan in so the machine could keep running. And the even stranger part is that Sandy Duncan did not take over the role of Valerie at all. She came in as a totally different character, Sandy Hogan, while Valerie Hogan was quietly written off-screen in a car accident. That may rub you the wrong way, but that was American television back then. They did not wait for things to settle down. They did not give the audience much time to breathe. They just found a new face fast and expected everybody to learn to accept it. If this is the point where you are realizing the show was even messier than you remembered, then go ahead and hit like on the video, because from here on out, there are only 5 facts left, and things are about to get even harder to believe. Ready for the countdown. Number 5, Brandon Tartikoff was not about to let one actor bring down the whole show. At this point, Valerie was no longer just some old sitcom with a messy behind-the-scenes story. It had turned into the kind of case TV people would look back on later as an example nobody could really forget. The Television Academy even treated it as the closest thing to a model for something that is actually pretty rare, a show losing its central face and still managing to stay alive. What makes this story even sharper is Brandon Tartikoff. He did not look at it as just a noisy controversy. He saw it as a power test. Tartikoff wanted to prove that one central actor could not bring down an entire series, especially when the show still had value for NBC. In other words, this was not just a decision to keep a sitcom alive. It was also the network's way of reminding all of Hollywood that American television sometimes runs like a machine that is bigger than any one person inside it. And maybe it was a warning too for any actor thinking about trying something similar. Well, that is my guess anyway. Number 4. In the middle of all the noise. Valerie still managed to leave behind a solid track record. Pretty surprising, right? People usually remember this show for the lawsuits, the title changes, the cast replacement, and all the messy behind-the-scenes stuff. But if you open the right file drawer, you will see it did not go through that era of American television empty-handed. This show actually left behind some very respectable professional recognition. It got a BMI Music Award, which means even the music side of the show was acknowledged by the industry. And honestly, when you think about it, that makes sense. A show can be chaotic in real life, but on screen it still has to be polished enough for people to score it highly. And what I like even more is that the trace of that was not limited to the music. The Hogan boys got recognized too. Jeremy Licht and Danny Ponce both picked up nominations at the Youth in Film Awards from the period when it was still Valerie, all the way through the time it had become the Hogan Family. That tells me something really clearly. In the middle of all the grown-up drama audiences, and people in the industry still saw the real value of the family piece sitting at the center of this show. Number 3. This show still has not disappeared. It is still alive on Rewind TV. A lot of old shows only stay alive in a few newspaper articles, a few blurry clips on YouTube, or in the memories of people who watched them as kids. But this show is different. It is still airing on Rewind TV under the name The Hogan Family. And that is exactly what makes this whole story even stranger. The name that is still alive now is not Valerie, and it is not Valerie's family either. The name that lasted is The Hogan Family, the final name, the one that came out of the biggest chaos the show ever went through. Rewind TV even points out very clearly that this was a show that had 3 different names. That is when you really see how strange American television can be sometimes. A show can survive every kind of breakdown, and in the end, the thing left standing the strongest is the name that was born after the storm. Number 2. This show almost ended right after its first 6 episodes. After hearing everything that happened to Valerie, it is easy to assume this was a big project from the start, a show the network had all kinds of confidence in before it later spiraled into chaos. But actually, the truth is the exact opposite. Before it had time to change names, before it had time to stir up controversy, before it became one of the strangest backstage sitcom stories of the 80s, it was in a way shakier position than most people realize. Under the original plan, this show almost stopped at just 6 episodes. In other words, before there was this whole giant history for people to sit around analyzing, it was just a test to see whether audiences even wanted to keep this family around at all. Then, NBC started liking what it saw, and the first season eventually got expanded to 10 episodes. That detail alone is enough to make me laugh when I look back at the whole journey of this show. A series that later got renamed, recentered, cancelled, rescued, and then kept on living through reruns, almost did not survive long enough in the first place to become part of anybody's memory. And if you think a show like this, almost lasting only 6 episodes, is twisted, enough already, do not look away from the screen yet. Because the final fact shows that the way this show ended was even stranger than the way it began. Number 1. Even. This show's final goodbye came at the wrong time. If I had to pick one image that sums up Valerie's fate from beginning to end, I would pick this one. A family sitcom that changed names, changed people, and changed the whole direction of its own survival, ended up saying goodbye in the weirdest way possible. The final episode of the series was a Christmas episode, and it was supposed to air during the holiday season at the end of 1990. But CBS canceled the show in December of that year before all of season 6 had finished airing. So the Hogan family's last goodbye did not come in winter at all. It drifted all the way to July 1991 before it finally aired. It sounds like a joke, but that really was how this show ended. It is so weird. Season 6 had 13 episodes, but only 9 aired at first. The last 4 were held back for months, and one of them was the Christmas episode Ho Ho Hogan's, which finally aired on July 20th, 1991. A show that was always out of sync with itself all the way through, ended by going out of sync in exactly the same way. Valerie is still memorable even now. This is not just some old family sitcom with a few random behind-the-scenes stories. It is almost one of the messiest shows American television ever produced, so the facts around it obviously are not exactly gentle either. It left behind a mark that feels strange, uncomfortable in some places, but also very honest about how Hollywood works when money, power, fame, and family television all crash into each other. What about you? Which fact on this list knocked you over the most? Do not forget to share your thoughts or even some memory you have of this show. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel so we can keep revisiting more classic shows together.